Can a brake failure ruin Hamilton's dream with Ferrari just before his most anticipated career at home? Lewis Hamilton, nothing was kept. At the end of the 2025 Austria Grand Prix, he got off the car with his face visibly frustrated, and in an unusual act in him, he broke the silence with a statement that echoed throughout the paddock. "We have brake problems, so I had to manage them very early. That definitely made us wasting time. I am pressing a lot to fix it because that is not right." It was not a critic in the air. It was a direct, forceful, almost desperate statement. Ferrari, the most legendary team of Formula One, is being indicated by its own star pilot. Not for a failed strategy or an error in boxes, but for something deeper. A structural failure in the heart of the SF25. What happened in Austria was not a technical anecdote. It was a breakdown. Because it was not a loss of isolated performance, nor a small adjustment that can be resolved with telemetry. It was a failure that puts in check the entire Ferrari project with Hamilton. When a Lewis-caliber pilot with 7 world titles feels the need to say publicly that he cannot trust the brakes, we are facing a crisis of trust, not only in the car but also in the team's ability to respond. This confession has even more weight at the time it arrives. It is barely the beginning of a season where Ferrari cannot afford failures, and Hamilton needs to show that his signing was more than a media blow. In his mind, the Austria Grand Prix should be a confirmation, a sign that the work done in Maranello during the winter had results. Instead, he found himself forced to pilot cautiously, managing a limitation that left him vulnerable from the first laps. For a pilot like Hamilton, who built his legend on the basis of precision, the absolute control of the car in each phase of the curve, having to release the accelerator prematurely and dose the braking is not just a frustration, it is a betrayal of instinct. Every time he approached a fast curve, he did not know with certainty if the brakes would respond as he should, and that in Formula One is unacceptable. In this sport, the difference between winning and being out of the points can be a bad curve taken due to lack of trust. And that is exactly what Hamilton lived. The message he left in Austria was not just for engineers or for Frederick Vasseur. It was a call for attention to the entire Ferrari structure. If they do not solve this problem before the Grand Prix of Great Britain, the most symbolic race for the British, they will not only lose track performance, they will lose the credibility of one of the most important pilots in history. And in modern Formula One, that is more expensive than any 10th by return. The Achilles heel of the SF25 is not something new, much less accidental. What Lewis Hamilton lived in Austria was simply the most visible and serious manifestation of a problem that Ferrari drags from the preseason tests, a technical defect that has been unable to be corrected, the brutal inconsistency in its braking system. In a category where every braking centimeter becomes thousands of advantage or disaster, Ferrari has given its star pilot a car that does not respond in a coherent way. And in Formula One, that is not a defect, it is a sentence. Hamilton defined it as a lottery, a phrase that in another context would even sound anecdotal, but that reveals the core of the problem here. Installing a brake game and waiting for it to work without guarantees, without predictability, is simply unacceptable. One day the brakes bite the track with the necessary forcefulness, and the next they fail in the critical point. This technical variability prevents the pilot from building back after return, and transforms each braking phase into an intuition exercise instead of precision. In a circuit like Red Bull Ring, where braking areas are short but extremely demanding, that lack of consistency completely takes you out of the competitive window. All this is aggravated by a fundamental change in the technical dynamics that Ferrari has failed to solve. For more than a decade, Hamilton dominated the carbon industry brakes in Mercedes, recognized for their progressive, linear, predictable response. But the SF25 is equipped with Brembo brakes, with an initial, more aggressive bite, an instantaneous response that does not tolerate mistakes or imprecise adjustments. It is a complete philosophy change in the interaction between the pilot and the car. Where I could play with pedal pressure before and modulate the load, it now meets a system that punishes the smallest excess or deficiency. The SF25 in the hands of Leclerc, which has lived with this configuration for years, is a stable machine. But in the hands of Hamilton, newcomer, the car becomes unpredictable and nervous, particularly in high-speed curves where the balance between brake and direction is more delicate. Alex Brundle explained it with surgical clarity. Hamilton's braking style, more aggressive than Leclerc's when entering fast curves, disturbs Ferrari. Aerodynamic loads and peso distribution of SF25 seem not to tolerate such inputs. This is not a piloting failure, but a mismatch between the tool and the pilot. Hamilton tries to impose his style, but the car responds with distrust, which forces him to correct his technique on the fly. And that adaptation in full season with the rivals by pressing in each race is a luxury that cannot be allowed. In addition, the conditions of the Austria Grand Prix did nothing more than aggravate the crisis. With track temperatures close to 50 degrees Celsius, the thermal management of the brakes and the tires became an impossible task. Instead of attacking, Hamilton was forced to adopt a defensive approach. Techniques such as the lift and coast from early race stages to protect the brakes. This meant stopping before, lifting the foot of the accelerator and giving valuable meters in each curve. The result was an estimated loss of between 3 and 5 tenths per lap. In a 70s spin, we are talking about a gap that can make a difference between points and nothing. The most alarming thing is that Ferrari knew this problem before the start of the season. The data showed it, the evidence confirmed it, and yet the SF25 arrived in Austria with the same structural weaknesses. There was no redesign of tweezers or improved ventilation, or a radical change in the selection of materials. Hamilton is not asking for magic. It is demanding what any pilot needs to be competitive: consistency, predictability, trust. And until now, Ferrari has not lived up to the challenge. The clock progresses, and for Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari, every second that passes without a specific solution represents a direct threat to the prestige and the objectives of a whole season. Silverstone is just around the corner, and it is not simply another calendar race. It is the scenario where Hamilton has built part of its legend, the place where its connection with the British fans reaches a unique intensity. Running there with a car that you cannot trust in braking would be much more than a technical inconvenience. It would be a direct affront to everything that represents as a pilot. It would be to return to the place where it was invincible so many times, now with the fear that the car will betray it at the most crucial moment. And there is no room for error. Silverstone is a circuit that requires perfection in each pilot phase. Its high-speed curves, such as Maggots, Beckett's or Kopp's, force the pilot to blindly trust the car balance and above all in the precision of the brakes. On a track where more than 300 kilometers per hour is entered and the car is stopped in tenths of a second, any instability or inconsistency can be catastrophic. It is not a route where a technical defect can be hidden. There, everything is exposed. If Ferrari does not deliver a stable car, Hamilton will not only be left behind in the points table, but could be humiliated before his audience. The urgency is so real that in Maranello there is no longer talk of adjustments, but of redesign. The technical team has been put on maximum alert, aware that they need to reconfigure fundamental elements in record time. It speaks internally of a possible total review in the brake components, from the type of pills, the way in which the system ventilation is mounted and calibrate to reduce thermal fatigue. Everything, absolutely everything, is on the table. It has even been considered to try again alternative materials that provide a more progressive bite, closer to the one Hamilton dominated in Mercedes. But time is pressing, and in modern Formula One, redesign a critical component in less than 2 weeks is not only ambitious, it is almost impossible. At the same time, internal pressure grows. Hamilton, which has been characterized by his diplomacy in previous stages of his career, is no longer willing to wait passively. He has used his media influence to send a clear message to the team. It is not a whim of adaptation. This is competitive survival. And within Ferrari's surroundings, this has been interpreted as a red line. Or they deliver a car worthy of their pilot, or the 2025 project can begin to collapse even before reaching the summer break. Silverstone is more than a race. It is an emotional breakdown point. For Hamilton, it is the opportunity to claim your leap to Ferrari, to show that you can still compete at the highest level. For Ferrari, it is the possibility of silencing doubts and showing that the signing of 7-time champion was not a media operation, but an act of real sports ambition. But if the SF25 brakes fail again in that scenario, the damage will be much deeper than a bad classification. It will be a crack in the credibility of the team, in the pilot's confidence, and in the dream that both built together. Do you think Ferrari will solve the problem of brakes on time for Silverstone? Or are we facing the beginning of an inevitable outcome for the Hamilton-Ferrari project? The situation is much more than a simple technical issue. What is at stake here is the prestige of a historical team and the last great opportunity of a champion who has won everything, but now depends on his car allows him to continue writing history. Every second that passes without a definitive solution feeds uncertainty. And in that void, doubts, rumors, questions begin to emerge. Is Ferrari really prepared to hold a pilot such as Hamilton? And is Lewis ready to endure another season full of frustrations, this time dressed in red? Silverstone will not just a race. It will be a statement, a verdict, the scenario where it will be known if this alliance is able to support the pressure, correct on time, and build something worthy of their names. Because when a team like Ferrari and a pilot like Hamilton join forces, expectation is not to finish rooms or manage damage. It is to dominate. It is winning. It is excited. But if the brakes continue to fail, all that potential will become disappointment. And when that happens in Formula One, the consequences can be irreversible. So now it's your turn. Do you think Hamilton's talent and Ferrari engineering can converge in time to save this season?